as I said, we are going to be looking at the book of Daniel, and for the start. And I believe that the book of Revelation is like a part two of the book of Daniel. There are certain principles that are laid out in the book of Daniel that are very important for us to understand. I know most of us agree with this because, you know, most people who have an Adventist background, you are very much into the prophecies of Daniel and Revelation. But there are some key concepts that I believe have been overlooked. And because we have overlooked those key concepts, we come to wrong conclusions in some vital areas. And so I want to go back to the book of Daniel this evening and try to get an overview of some things, try to get a basic understanding of some of these principles so that when we go to Revelation, we have that foundation. There are only 25 of us present this evening, present in the chat. So I don't want to have to go back over this, but I suppose the recording will be there for others to watch who might come in afterward, because I believe the foundation is important. Now, I know that we're all familiar with the book of Daniel, and so I'm not going to go into every detail. When I first started studying Daniel and the Revelation, I got the book by Uriah Smith. It was one of the first books I ever bought as a Christian, and it was very, very precious to me. I read it about 4 times, and I love that book. I still have copies of it, but it gave me a good foundation. But I made the mistake of believing that everything in that book was absolutely correct. I made that mistake, and because of it, my mind was closed for a long time. Somebody had to show me some things in it that were clearly not in agreement with the scriptures, and that's when I was broken out of that yoke. And I began to read with an open mind, and yes, I appreciate the background that I got. I'm not going to knock it, and I'm not going to say it was no good. I'm not going to tear down Uriah Smith because he has some mistakes, because he wasn't perfect. And I don't think I'm perfect either, but at the same time, it's a mistake to believe everything was correct. So coming to the Bible with an open mind, it's helpful to have some kind of background, but it's also important to have an open mind. That you saying something, Brother Howard? All right, somebody did. All right, it's important to have an open mind that we be open to hear what the Lord has to say. So let me make some general statements about the book of Daniel. We all understand that the book of Daniel it's a short book. It's made up of 12 chapters. It's divided into 12 chapters, and the chapters may be divided into sections. In fact, I think I have a little illustration of it that maybe I could just look at. All right, let me just show you my screen here. All right, so this is an outline of the book of the chapters in Daniel, and if you notice, we have 12 chapters, but I have labeled them in terms of what each chapter deals with. You have 5 chapters dealing with what we call history, and you have 6 chapters that I've labeled as prophetic chapters. Now, this is not 100% absolute, let me say, because even the historical chapters, they have information that have some prophetic implication. Let me tell you what I mean. For example, in chapter 3, if you can remember the layout of the book of Daniel, in chapter 3, you have the story of Nebuchadnezzar building this great image, and he commanded everybody to worship this image. And of course, you know the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who refused to bow to this image, and they were thrown into the burning fiery furnace. So what we have in this chapter 3, you have a representation of something that will happen in the future. We know that in the future, something is going to be built on this earth that is referred to as the mark of the beast, the image of the beast. I'm sorry, the image of the beast. And everybody will be commanded to worship this image. And if you don't worship the image, you are going to be persecuted. So what happened in Daniel was that you had an illustration of this crisis. God gave an illustration of it. So even though it's not a prophetic chapter, it is prophetic in the sense that it is a type or a symbol or an illustration of something that will happen in the future. The same thing is true of, for example, Daniel chapter 5, in Daniel chapter 6. In chapter 6, yes, in chapter 6, you have the story of Daniel being thrown into the lion's den. In chapter 5, you have the story of Nebuchadnezzar, of Belshazzar worshiping the gods of wood and stone, and the handwriting on the wall with the message of judgment. All of this is important. And as we study through Daniel and Revelation, we are going to see that these stories have important lessons that will help us as we study the prophetic parts. All right, now I know that I can be just talking. I am aware that when it comes to prophecy, I don't want to just talk. I think we should look at the Bible. So I'm going to go to the Bible itself in just a moment, because as we look at it, we can get the images in our mind. I don't want to just talk, all right? But I'm going to just mute everybody unless you have something to say. I'm getting a little disturbance from time to time. So I'm muting everybody. All right, so 6 chapters deal with prophecy, 5 chapters deal with history, but even the history, it has significance where the prophecies are concerned. All right, that's simple enough. Now, there's a verse in Daniel chapter 12, a passage in verses 8 to 10 that I want to read. At the end of the book of Daniel, this is almost the final statement made in the book, almost the final statement. And if we believe that the Bible is an important book, a truthful book, then every intelligent person will consider this passage very carefully. I understand that the Jews declare that the book of Daniel is not a dependable book. One of the reasons is because in the book of Daniel there is a prophecy that proves that Jesus Christ is a Messiah in Daniel chapter 9. I understand that the rabbis say anybody who tries to compute the numbers in Daniel is cursed. I never saw it. I read this, I believe it was in Uriah Smith's book. But anyway, here is something in the last chapter, near to the end of the book. It says, "And I heard, but I understood not. Then said I, O my Lord, what shall be the end of these things? And he said, Go thy way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. Many shall be purified and made white and tried. But the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand." I want you to look at that last phrase. None of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. I've always been stirred by that statement, because I don't have any desire to be among the wicked. I want to be among the wise who understand. And that's one reason, that's one of the things that motivated me to study Daniel and Revelation. But it does say, right about the middle of the passage, right about the middle here, it says that the words were to be closed up and sealed till the time of the end. What it means is that as we come closer to the end of time, the prophecies of Daniel will be opened up and they will begin to be understood. So what I mean is that God shows us clearly it is his intention that we should understand these prophecies at this time, because we are in the time of the end. More than that, it is important we understand, because the wise will understand And if you are not wise, you fall into the category of the wicked. It's the wicked who will not understand, because God's people are going to be so involved in these prophecies that they will need to understand them. All right, so let's move on a bit. I asked a question: what is the key to understanding this book? There's a key, I believe, that helps us to get a good understanding of the book of Daniel. And this is not original with me. This key is not original. I read it somewhere many years ago, and it's stuck in my mind, and I've come to understand that it is the truth. Now, this is actually based on a statement made by Ellen White. And it's interesting because I don't believe that Ellen White had any especially insightful understanding of Daniel or Revelation, but she made a statement that proved to be very helpful. She said, consider the circumstances of the Jewish people at the time when the book was written. Consider the circumstances of the Jewish people at the time when the book was written. I don't know if this was her original insight or she heard it from somebody, from one of the pioneers, and she just was saying what the church was teaching. But it's a very important principle. To understand the book of Daniel, consider what was happening to the Jews at that time. And I'm going to explain to you why this is so important. God is constantly using parables. If you were to ask me, what is the greatest teaching tool that God uses? If God wants to teach us a lesson, how does he go about teaching that lesson? And I will say the most important tool that God uses, if you study the Bible, he uses a tool of parables and the principle of type. If you don't understand this, let me repeat it. The most important teaching tool that God uses, he uses parables and he uses types. Now, I could give you dozens of illustrations. When God wanted when God was going to punish the Israelites for their rebellion in the wilderness, what did God do? God gave them 1 day for a year. God says, the number of days that you went to search out the land, I'm going to allow you to stay in the wilderness for those 40 years, 1 year for a day. In other words, every moment that the Jews thought about it, they could know exactly how long it was going to be. They could just remember how long were the spies in the land of Canaan. 40 days. So then they would remember we are to be in the wilderness for 40 years. God was using little pictures to illustrate the bigger picture. When Israel was going to be taken away into captivity, God told Ezekiel to lie on his side for a certain amount of days. Then he was to lie on the other side for a certain amount of days. And it was to be a lesson to the Israelites of how long they were going to be subdued in captivity. Again, he told Ezekiel that he was to use human dung to cook his food. And when Ezekiel complained, God said, okay, I'll allow you to use cow's dung. And again, it was to be an illustration of what would happen to the Israelites. So God gave people things that they were to do. They were to act out the future. One time God told Isaiah to walk naked and barefoot for 3 years. Naked and barefoot. It was a lesson to the Jews, and God gave Isaiah to act out this lesson. So I'm making the point. It's a point that is very important. God uses parables as his greatest teaching tool. So when you come to the book of Daniel, what we see in the book of Daniel is another great parable. What is Daniel about? Daniel is about what happens to God's people in the end of time. It's a book about the end times. The verse we just read says that The book would not be understood until the time of the end. And the wicked will do wickedly, and none of the wicked will understand, but the wise would understand. It's a book about the end time. But it was written 2,600 years ago. And what God did, God used the situation of the Jews. God used their circumstances to be a parable or a type or an illustration of what will happen at the end of time. So you can look at what was happening to Israel, and you can take that same situation and transpose it to our time, and you will see the same thing happening, but on a bigger, on an expanded scale. If you know how to read what Daniel is about, you will see the greater picture in our time. So the book of Daniel is a book about captivity and deliverance. And because it was happening to Daniel in his time, he thought it was referring to the Jewish nation. But we who live in these days when the book is opened, we understand it's about captivity and deliverance, but not a literal set of Jews or another a literal nation like the Americans or the British or the Jamaicans. It's talking about captivity and deliverance on a greater scale. It's the captivity of God's people in spiritual Babylon and their deliverance out of spiritual Babylon. Just as the physical Jews were in physical Babylon, and God told them about their deliverance. So the story of Daniel is a parable of the greater deliverance to take place at the end of time. And that is the key to understanding the book of Daniel. When you understand this, certain lessons begin to jump out at you. All right, let's go on. What were the circumstances that the Jews were facing? Number one, Israel was a kingdom which had been completely destroyed. Their kingdom had been destroyed. And how would I compare that to what we see today? All right, we're going to come to that. Here's a passage from 2 Chronicles 36, from verses 16 to 17, which tells you what happened to the Jews. It says, but they mocked the messengers of God and despised his words. They misused his prophets, and until the wrath of God rose against his people, till there was no remedy. And therefore he brought upon them the king of the Chaldees, that was Nebuchadnezzar, who slew their young men with the sword and the house of their sanctuary, and had no compassion upon young man or maiden, old man or him that stooped for age. He gave them all into his hand. And so it tells you about how Nebuchadnezzar destroyed Jerusalem, how he took away the vessels out of the house of God, great and small. He took away the vessels, the dishes out of the temple, took away all the gold from the temple, burnt down the temple, break down the wall of Jerusalem, burnt all the palaces, and carried away all the Jews to Babylon. They took the king of Judah, and they dug out his eyes, and they killed his two sons. It says here they slew the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes, and put out the eyes of Zedekiah, and bound him with fetters of brass, and carried him to Babylon. So even though Judah was the people of God, was supposed to be the people of God, that's important, because in the world at that time, the only people that God called his own were the Israelites. And the 10 tribes had already been destroyed by Sennacherib, the king of Assyria. The 10 tribes no longer existed. Nobody knows where they were. Judah was left. The Jews were left with the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin and the tribe of Levi. They were left. And they followed in the apostasy of the 10 tribes until eventually God brought Nebuchadnezzar against them and carried away the people to Babylon. So the people of God were captives in Babylon. That was the condition of God's people. And that is how Daniel ended up in Babylon. They were carried away. He was carried away captive along with all the young people. Nebuchadnezzar didn't kill all the people. He was kind of like a wise king. He killed the men of war, but he didn't destroy the nation. He took the young men who were bright and who seemed to have promise, and he took them and put them in school in Babylon to learn the ways of Babylon so they could help to build the kingdom of Babylon. So he carried the Jews into Babylon, and he made sure that he put these young men to school. That is how Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah ended up going to school in Babylon. They ended up in Nebuchadnezzar's university, along with some other young men. Now, it's important that we understand that there were 4 aspects of the kingdom that were overthrown. All right? And this is important as we look at the book of Daniel. There was, see, I have labeled them. There was a physical kingdom. There was a political kingdom. There was the religious kingdom, and there's what I call the demographic kingdom. What do these terms mean? All right, I'm going to move on. I'm going to move on to give me a second. I'm going to move on to another. I have to open up another set of slides here. Let me see if I can do that. Okay. All right. So where we are now is in Daniel chapter 2. I'm going to look at the 4 things that I mentioned, and we're going to see how they were, what each one represented. Now, Daniel had a vision. No, Nebuchadnezzar had a vision in Daniel chapter 2. We are aware of this. This is one of the most well-known prophecies in the Bible. In Nebuchadnezzar's vision, he saw an image, and the head of this image was of gold. We all understand what this means. This head of gold represented the kingdom of Babylon. I won't go into it in detail at the primary level because most of us understand this. If there's anybody in the meeting who does not understand the prophecy of Daniel 2, please stop me. Anybody? All right. So I'm going to assume that most of us have a basic understanding of this prophecy, and I'm going to just continue on that assumption. So the head of gold of this image represented Babylon. Then after that, he saw that the image had breast and arms of silver, and the breast and arms of silver represented the kingdom of the Medes and the Persians, the Medo-Persians. Then he saw the belly and the thighs of brass, and the belly and the thighs of brass represented the kingdom of Greece. The legs were of iron, and the iron legs represented the kingdom of Rome, and the feet were of iron and clay mixed together, which represented Rome divided Rome. This is something that we're all familiar with. So Nebuchadnezzar had this dream. He saw this image. Nobody was able to interpret the meaning of the dream. And he was about to kill all the wise men of Babylon until Daniel was brought before him, and Daniel was able to tell him the meaning of the dream. Daniel told him that this image represented the history of the world. There would be in the history of the world 4 great kingdoms. Babylon was the first. From the point in time that the vision was given, Nebuchadnezzar had his dream. The kingdom at that time was Babylon. After Babylon, there would be 3 more great kingdoms, Medo-Persia, then Greece, then Rome. Then after that, Rome would be divided. There would be in it the strength of iron and the weakness of clay. But from what Daniel said, there would never again be one kingdom that ruled the world after Rome. So this was the first image, the first vision of Daniel. This is the first prophecy in the book of Daniel. In this prophecy, God shows us. All right, let me go before I come back to what each thing signifies. Let me go on. In the second vision, which is found in Daniel chapter 7. This time it was not Nebuchadnezzar who had a dream, but it was Daniel who had the vision. He saw a lion, and the lion represented the same kingdom of Babylon. He saw a bear with 3 ribs in the mouth, representing the kingdom of Medo-Persia. He saw a leopard with 4 heads and 4 wings, representing Greece. He saw a great and terrible beast with iron teeth and claws of brass, which represented Rome. And then on the head of this beast, he saw 10 horns, which represented the kingdom of Rome divided up into smaller parts. Then in Daniel chapter 8, you had a third vision. Again, Daniel had this vision. And in this vision, he saw two animals fighting together. One of them was a ram. One of them, he had two horns. One horn was high and the other one was higher. And then after that, he saw a goat, a he-goat. And the goat and the ram, of course, had a battle. They were fighting together. Now the ram, we are told very clearly that this ram, this male sheep, represented the kingdom of Medo-Persia. So you can see that as we are traveling across, the breast and the arms of silver represents the bear, which represents the ram. The belly and the thighs of brass represents the leopard, which represents the he-goat. The lion at the top represented Babylon, which represented the head of gold. But when you come to chapter 8, with the ram and the he-goat, there is nothing there to represent the lion. And the reason is, at this point in time, the kingdom of Babylon was about to pass away. It was about to pass away. It was not to feature in the prophecies any longer. So God does not mention Babylon in chapter 8. So you have Medo-Persia, you have Greece, and then after that you had a massive horn coming out of the head of the goat. There were 4 horns, then out of one of them there came another massive horn. And if you are following the sequence of the prophecies, you would say that massive horn corresponds to this terrible beast in Daniel 7 and corresponds to the legs of iron. So this terrible horn would represent the kingdom of Rome. Then in chapter 11, you had the 4th prophecy. It started in chapter 10 and went over to chapter 11. And in chapter 11, it's important that we understand God does not show symbols anymore. Notice something, it's important. In chapter 2, the image, there's a symbol. Chapter 7, the 4 wild beasts, symbols. Chapter 8, the ram and the he-goat, symbols. But in chapter 11, God is no longer dealing with symbols. Now he tells you about the king of Greece, and he tells you about the king of Rome, and he tells you about the king of the north and the king of the south. He's not dealing with symbols anymore. He's not dealing with animals or images anymore. He starts talking about real people. What we can understand is that Daniel 11 is not a symbolic prophecy. Daniel 11, which goes on into chapter 12, is a chapter that is a prophecy that deals with real live elements. As a matter of fact, God tells you very clearly that the king of Greece and the king of the Medes and the first king, he describes in detail who these kings are. So, what does this really mean? All right, let's go back to the prophecy of Daniel 2, the image. Now, I'm going to pause a little bit. You see, I'm telling you the truth. The rain is falling, and I hear the noise, and I can hardly hear myself, so I'm tending to speak a little loud. And I think my voice, I feel like I'm talking too loud, but the rain is affecting me, so I feel like I have to talk loud. So I'm kind of getting like I'm
Your volume
losing.
is fine.
Sister Lorena, say that again.
Your volume is fine.
Okay, thank you. Am I kind of rambling a little bit, or are you understanding?
No, it's okay.
You can hear pretty well, Brother David.
We're understanding.
All right, all right. When I'm talking loud, and we're not having a feedback, I kind of feel like I'm just speaking into space, and I'm thinking like maybe the points I'm making are not getting across. So I appreciate the feedback. All right.
Brother David, can I ask you a question?
Absolutely. Go ahead, Sister Merlin.
When did God stop talking about prophecy? Was it in chapter 10 or chapter 11 of Daniel?
He went right, the prophecy continues right up to chapter 12, right to the end, right to the very end of the book.
I think
Okay.
she meant symbolism.
Yes, symbolism. Symbolism. Yes, thank you.
All right. Symbolism ends with Daniel chapter 8 when he talks about the ram and the he-goat. That chapter is a symbolic chapter. But when you go to chapter 11, from the beginning, you see him talking about the king of Greece and the king of Medo Persia. And he goes on to talk about the king of the north and the king of the south. And to be consistent, when God starts speaking in a certain way, he maintains that pattern. So you would have to continue from chapter 11 right into chapter 12, which is the same vision, and you have to say that in everything he's dealing with literal things and not symbolic things. And when we actually come to look at those chapters, you will see why it is important to understand this. Is that okay, Sister Merle?
Yes, thank you so much.
All right, you're welcome. So we're going to go back now to chapter 2, and we want to look at the image and see what can we pick up from this. Now, I'm not going into the details because all of us understand the details. Head of gold, Babylon. Breast and arms of silver, Medo Persia. Breast of belly and thighs of brass, Greece, and so forth. We understand this, and those are things that we have studied from the very beginning right through, and we're very familiar with. But I just want to look at certain principles. All right. So in Daniel chapter 2, in verse 35, when this is what Daniel tells Nebuchadnezzar. He's explaining the vision. He says, then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver. He talks about a stone smiting the image. In fact, he talks about a stone smiting the image. A great stone was cut out from a mountain without hands, and it smote the image on the feet. And it says, the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, the gold was broken to pieces together and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away, that no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. I'm going to say right at the beginning that the Daniel chapter 2 speaks about the restoration of the kingdom of God. Remember what I said at the beginning. The book of Daniel is looking at the condition of the Jewish people. Their kingdom is gone. Daniel chapter 2, God shows them that the kingdom is to be restored. Now, when Daniel hears about the kingdom of God, or when he speaks about the kingdom of God, the stone becoming a great mountain and filling the whole earth, what do you think he's thinking about? Somebody answer me. What do you think he's thinking about? Anybody with a thought?
Israel. The Jewish nation filling the earth.
Thank you, Brother Sean, and thank you, Cliff. He's thinking of the Jewish nation. God is using the circumstances of Daniel, and he's using the desire in Daniel's heart as a springboard, for the prophecy that deals with something greater. And once you get this principle, you can see it in all 4 prophecies of Daniel. You can see it right through. So Daniel is thinking of the Jewish nation and the Jewish kingdom and the kingdom of David and of Solomon, again overcoming all the nations of the world and filling the whole earth. And you can believe that when Daniel is telling Nebuchadnezzar, his heart is full. He believes that his people are coming back into prominence. And it's true, but not in the way that he understands. So this chapter focuses on the physical. If you look at this blue box, it says physical. This chapter focuses on the physical restoration of the kingdom. It focuses on the restoration of the place. Bear that in mind. We will see the significance of this in a little bit, but there are 4 aspects to the kingdom, as I said earlier on. I didn't dwell on it too much, but there is a physical, there is a religious aspect, there's the demographic aspect, and there is the it eludes me at the moment, but we'll come to it. There is
Religious.
Religious, I said religious. It's the one we are going to next.
It's physical, political.
The political. Thank you. Thank you, Sister Diane. It's the political aspect of the kingdom, because these are the things that make up a nation. You have the physical, like for example, Jamaica. Jamaica cannot be a nation without a land mass. It would be ridiculous to talk about the country of Jamaica when there's no country. There's a physical place. It's 150 miles long and 50 something miles wide, or 40 something miles wide. That's Jamaica. A little speck of dust, but it's a physical place. And then also you talk about the government of Jamaica. The political system that exists here is very important to the identity of the country. We became independent in 1962. We have a two-party system of government and all of that. So, and then in our day, you don't have a religion that dominates the government. But in the days of Daniel, you had the religion of Jehovah. They had their God for their nation. The Babylonians had their God, Bel and Marduk and so forth. And every nation had the God that was a part of the kingdom. And our religious kingdom today, we have a God and we have a religion. Our religion is Christianity. So in the spiritual kingdom, we do have a religious aspect. And then fourthly, you had the demographic aspect of the kingdom, which was the actual people. You cannot have a country of Jamaica if there are no people. So you have these four aspects, and these were the four aspects that made up the kingdom of Israel, and every single one of those things was taken away by the Babylonians. They took away the people out of the land of Canaan, and they put strangers to live in the country. It was, for the most part, it was left empty. But they put a few, well, it was the Assyrians who did that with the other 10 tribes. But the Babylonians left Judah pretty much empty. They took away the physical kingdom. They took away the political kingdom. They took the king and they dug out his eyes, and they killed his two sons before his eyes. So there was no king, and there was no governmental system. The government that ruled the Israelites was the government of Babylon. And the religious kingdom was gone because they broke down the temple, took away everything out of the temple, and they carried the Jews away to Babylon, and many of them started to worship Babylonian gods. And finally, the demographic, the people were gone. They were captives in a foreign land. And all of this, God deals with in the book of Daniel. He talks about restoration. Restoration of the physical, the political, the religious, and the demographic part of the kingdom. All of these. And yet, he is speaking of a greater restoration. And that is the key to understanding the book of Daniel. You see Daniel understanding one thing, and we understanding something else. You understand that the book of Daniel is a clear picture of what happens to God's people in the last days, but you have to interpret the symbols the right way. That's the point. So the second vision, the vision of the four beasts, this one speaks about the restoration of the political kingdom, the system of government for God's people. And it talks about what happens with Jesus, what happens in Daniel chapter 7. It says that somebody like the Son of Man is brought before it says that Jesus, somebody like the Son of Man, is brought before the Ancient of Days. And there was given him dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all people, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed. So this verse is speaking about the restoration of government. He is given dominion and he's given a kingdom. All nations and languages shall serve him. He has an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away. His kingdom shall not be destroyed. It's speaking about the restoration of the government of Israel, the government of Judah, the government of God's people. You can imagine when Daniel saw this, he's thinking about, okay, Down in Palestine, God is going to raise up a king like David and Solomon. And Israel is going to again be a kingdom that rules the world. We shall be the head and not the tail. But God is thinking about something completely different. Because up to this point, the idea of a spiritual kingdom is not very clear in the minds of God's people. They don't understand this. They understand the physical kingdom. The light of the spiritual kingdom was brought by Jesus and by the apostles. They are the ones who gave us this light. So the political kingdom. Then in chapter 7, in chapter 8, where you have the vision of the ram and the he-goat, we look at the restoration of the religious kingdom. Now, what is it?
David,
Yes, Brother Steve.
in the book of Acts, chapter 1, when Jesus was about to leave his disciples, they asked him concerning this kingdom. Was it remember they had seen Jesus as the leader,
Yes.
as the ruler, but they still ask him, would thou at this time restore the kingdom back to Israel? And he tell them, well, look, it's not for you to know that, what the Father has put in his knowledge. Then was it that they didn't really understand anything concerning this kingdom?
Yeah, that's a good question. What we can see is that the disciples, until about Pentecost, they were constantly misunderstanding the nature of the kingdom. Jesus could have told them 1,000 times. They didn't understand. You know, when you look at the things Jesus says, you really feel sympathy for them, because one time Jesus says, when I sent you out without any money and without any purse. Did you lack anything? They said, nothing, Lord. And Jesus says, okay, but now I'm going to tell you. The one who doesn't have a sword must sell his coat and buy a sword. The one who doesn't have any, he tells them something else they need to get as well. And what do? They pull out 2 swords. They say, Lord, look, we have 2 swords. And Jesus kind of sighs. He kind of sighs and he says, it is enough. It's enough. All right. And as I've asked, enough to do what? Enough to go fight a war? You can go and fight a war with 2 swords. What did he mean when he said it is enough? You have enough. All right, that means for the 12 disciples, they have 2 swords and it is enough. But you have to read between the lines. You have to look at the drama of what is happening. You have to feel, you have to put yourself in the picture. And when I look at the picture, I see Jesus kind of shaking his head. He's disappointed. He doesn't have the time for this argument anymore. These people are still misunderstanding him. And he says, it's enough. I can't do this. It doesn't make sense for me to talk anymore. You just have to wait and see, right? And so a little later on, Peter pulls one of those 2 swords and chops off the man's ear. And Jesus says, put up your sword. Those who take the sword shall perish with the sword. If you take the sword, you are going to die by the sword. When he said, it is enough, he didn't mean that you have enough swords. He simply meant, it's enough. I'm through with this argument. It doesn't make sense for me to talk anymore. I just have to wait until you guys learn the lesson the hard way. It's like when he told them to watch and pray with me. And he came and found them sleeping. He says, what? You couldn't watch with me 1 hour? He comes back and finds them sleeping. And what does he say? He says, it's okay. Sleep and take your rest. When that was the moment when they needed to get up because the enemies were approaching. But it just shows you how Jesus says things, because he's weary of saying the same thing over and over and over and being misunderstood. And so, as Brother Steve says, they come and they say, for the umpteenth time, they misunderstand. It started with John the Baptist. The kingdom of heaven is at hand. Jesus has spoken about the kingdom of God is within you. And they're still thinking that Jesus came to set up a physical kingdom. But they did learn. Later on, they learned that it was somewhere far in the future. So anyway.
That was probably why he was so excited to get Paul under his tutelage, because Paul got it.
I think so, Brother Cliff. I think so. And that is why, you know, whenever we get into Paul, we get excited ourselves because we begin to see what we don't see anywhere else. So anyway, chapter 8, we look at the religious aspect of the kingdom, and it's very strikingly religious, because when you look at the chapter, right at the beginning, what do you see? You see a ram and a he-goat. And what do you associate the ram and the he-goat with in the Old Testament? With the sanctuary.
They're the same
sanctuary.
color. And they're
Yes.
clean animals. And the other ones that were political were all unclean.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that is one thing that further emphasizes that we are in the realm of the religious kingdom. So you see the conflict between Medo Persia and Greece, and yet God is using sanctuary animals. And the reason why is, as you come down near the end of that chapter, you have this statement. And he said unto me, Daniel 8 and verse 14, he said unto me, unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed or be restored. That is interesting, because what it tells me is that in the book of, in Daniel chapter 8, one of the main things that God is focusing on is the cleansing or the restoration of the sanctuary. Now, the King James Version says the sanctuary will be cleansed, but if you go to the Revised Version or almost any other version, it will tell you the sanctuary is to be restored or vindicated. Now, when Daniel sees a prophecy about the sanctuary being restored, of course, he thinks about the Hebrew sanctuary. He thinks about the sanctuary that Nebuchadnezzar destroyed and tore down to the ground. And all the Jews are praying for the sanctuary. In fact, when Daniel prays, he opens his window, turns it towards the sanctuary, turns it towards Jerusalem, and he prays towards the sanctuary, because the sanctuary is the center of their dedication to Jehovah. So he hears these angels speaking, and one of them says, 2,300 days, then the sanctuary shall be cleansed or shall be restored. And of course, he thinks about the sanctuary at Jerusalem, but the angel is speaking about something to happen at the end of time. Because later in the chapter, I can't bring up the Bible and the pictures at the same time, which is a pity, because I want us to go to, in fact, I'm going to switch from the pictures for a moment, go to the Bible and bring it up, because I want us to see how it's kind of very clear in the Bible. Let me bring up the Bible. In Daniel chapter 8. All right, look at what it says near the end of Daniel. It says, and the vision of the evening and the morning, that is the vision of the 2,300 days, which was told, is true. Wherefore shut thou up the vision, for it shall be for many days. And I, Daniel, fainted and was sick certain days. All right, so let me see another one. There is another statement. Oh, yes, right. Okay, verse 17. Look at verse 17. So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was afraid and fell upon my face. But he said unto me, understand, O son of man, for at the time of the end shall be the vision. This vision about the ram and the he-goat, but especially it comes down to me to where it says, unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. I'm going to tell you this kind of like, by the way, it's not our theme this evening, but there are many people who are very critical of the Seventh-day Adventist understanding about the 2,300 days applying to the end of time. They say it was fulfilled thousands of years ago in the time of the Greek king Antiochus Epiphanes. I don't agree. I've studied it and I don't agree. But notice what the angel says. He says, at the time of the end shall be the vision. That makes it very clear to me that this prophecy applies to the end of time and not 2,000 years ago, not 2,000 plus years ago. So you can understand why Daniel fainted. Daniel fainted and was sick, because the angel tells him clearly, shut up the vision, for it shall be for many days. He makes Daniel understand this is a great distance in the future. And what is Daniel hoping for? He's hoping for the restoration of the sanctuary down in Jerusalem. In fact, God had promised the Jews that after 70 years, they would go back to Jerusalem. And the 70 years was almost finished at this time. And now the angel comes and tells Daniel that it will be for many days, a far distance in the future. And so Daniel faints, right? It's like I've been cut off from my family for 10 years. And God tells me that I will see them in 11 years. God tells me I'm going to see my wife and my children again after 11 years. And I've been waiting 10 years. And then after 11 and a half years, after 11 years, God comes back and gives me a vision and says, I'm going to see them in 50 years. Look here, I would faint. I would drop down as well, like Daniel. Daniel faints because he thinks God is telling him that there's going to be no restoration of the sanctuary anytime soon. And yet the time was almost up. So there is this confusion in the book of Daniel where Daniel is seeing one thing, expecting one thing, and God is talking about something different and something greater. And it's not just in the book of Daniel, it's throughout the entire, it's through the Old Testament prophecies. You see that same principle coming up again and again. So anyway, so we see here the restoration of the sanctuary. Then shall the sanctuary be cleansed, the restoration of God's system of worship. So chapter 8 is speaking about the religious kingdom. You cannot have the kingdom without the land space. You can't have the kingdom without the king. You can't have the kingdom without the religion. And so we see Daniel 2 talks about the restoration of the actual kingdom itself, the land. Then chapter 7 talks about the restoration of the king and the political kingdom, Israel coming back. Chapter 8 talks about the restoration of the true system of worship, religion coming back. And the last prophecy in chapter 11, it talks about the restoration of the people themselves. So chapter 11 talks about the king of the north and the king of the south. And it talks about the restoration of the people, the demographic part of the kingdom. And you find this expressed in Daniel chapter 12, verse 1. It says, at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince that standeth for the children of thy people. And there shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered, everyone that shall be found written in the book. Once again, put yourself in Daniel's place. Daniel sees Babylon full of Jews. His people are captives in a strange land. And God says, when the king of the north comes against the king of the south, like a whirlwind, at this time, and when the king of the north is destroyed without hand, and he plants the tabernacles of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain, at this time, Michael will stand up. And there will be a time of trouble, a great time of trouble, and your people shall be delivered. And when Daniel talks about deliverance, he means they are going to go back to the land of Palestine.
But stick up in there, Brother David. If Daniel is thinking of all of that, was there a book in which people's names were written back in those days? Because it says everyone whose name is written in the book. What was in his mind when he heard that?
You know, you make a good point, because when they actually went back, do you know that they had a book in which was written the name of all those who were among the priests, and those whose names were not in there, even though they were Levites, they were not allowed to serve as Levites. So it seems like there was actually a literal fulfillment of this even among the physical Jews. They had books. They had, if you notice, the Old Testament is full of genealogies. They can go back and they can trace from the time of Joseph right back to Adam. They can trace from Mary back to Adam. So the genealogy is very important. And I think if you read the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, you'll find that they actually had genealogies determining who was to go back. And if you were not written in the book, I don't think you could find an inheritance in Israel. Definitely not among the priests. But I think it applied right across the board to all Israel. You had to be in the genealogy. You had to be in the books. You had to be in the book for you to actually be able to go back there. It's kind of like today, all right? If you go to America and claim to be a citizen, and they don't have a record of your birth, and you're not in the book, you're not in the records, trust me, you won't be allowed to stay there unless you get your name in the book somehow. You get there as a refugee or something, and they accept you. But your birth certificate is important for you to belong to a nation. And I think this idea was there in Daniel's mind. It must have been when he talks about written in the book. But we understand it in a greater sense, because we understand God also has a citizenship role. There's a roll call. There's a roll call book, and it is for those who are in Christ. And this is what he's really referring to here in Daniel.
How did Daniel envision Michael standing up?
I don't think I can answer that question. I know that Michael is described. You know, Daniel got to know about Michael because of the visions he had. And Gabriel refers to him as Michael, your prince. And here he's called the great prince that stands for the children of your people. So I know that he understood Michael to be a special person assigned to Israel. He belonged to Israel in a special way.
Yeah. Do you think that he was thinking that Michael was the Messiah, the promised Messiah? And would you think he might be thinking in his mind that the Messiah is going to come at this time and establish the kingdom, like the Jews did in the days of Jesus?
I can't answer definitively, but if you ask my opinion, I don't think he understood Michael to be the Messiah. I don't think in the Old Testament they had a clear idea of the incarnation. There are prophecies about the incarnation, but the people never understood their own prophecies. Even John the Baptist, who went out to preach about Jesus, you think he understood half of what the life of Jesus was about? He thought he had come to tear down the nations and set up another kingdom, and he never understood the death that Jesus had to die and suffer. They understood in a vague way about a coming Messiah, but they had no idea. Even the prophecy of Isaiah 43 that talks about the suffering Messiah, how many understood it? Nobody until after Pentecost, pretty much. So it kind of sets the stage in my mind for a lot of people today to be deceived in what is coming. There's going to be a lot of confusion and misunderstanding because people have set ideas in their mind. And it was like that with the Jews. The best of them, none of them understood the intricacies of what Jesus meant and of who he was going to be. We are looking back with hindsight, so we have everything kind of pretty clear in our mind, but they didn't have that advantage. And God didn't give even Daniel the details. He told him what would happen, but he couldn't put it together. It wasn't given to him. So anyway, Daniel 11, and it continues into. Say that again.
Sister Diane
That's
has her hand.
question.
Oh, I'm sorry. I can hardly see the hands here. Go ahead, Sister Diane.
Did they even have much understanding of the Son of God? Because the way I read the Old Testament, their whole idea of the one God was talking about Yahuwah. And even though Christ was standing in the
Carlos, we love the
place
meeting.
of Yahuwah, speaking for him as if he was him. He was his mouthpiece, but he was still being represented as himself through Christ. So I don't see a whole lot of understanding of the Son of God explicitly in the Old Testament. In their, if you read through their life, you know, there's just the one God, Yahuwah, and he's represented to them only. And that representation, of course, is Christ speaking for him in his stead. And
I,
I don't
I,
see.
I agree with you absolutely. When people try to argue the Trinity or against the Trinity from the Old Testament, in my opinion, it's a waste of time, because you can't argue what never existed in the minds of the people who wrote.
Mhm.
The revelation that God has a son is clear in the New Testament. Jesus brought this to light, but in the Old Testament, you just have some little hints. One
Mhm.
of the strongest ones is in Proverbs chapter 30, where Solomon says, "What is his
Mhm.
name and what is his son's name?" That's probably the clearest statement. In
Right.
Proverbs chapter 8, you have a passage that seems to also speak about it. But other
Mhm.
than that, they never knew that God had a son. Majority of the Jews, they never thought that God had a son, never knew such a thing, because it's not a part of God's revelation for that age.
What
Mhm.
about Nebuchadnezzar's statement when he said that the fourth one looks like the Son of God or a Son of God?
To be perfectly fair to that statement, Nebuchadnezzar would have had more light than the Jews if he said that. But he didn't have more light than the Jews. And the literal translation is, he looks like a son of the gods.
Of the gods.
What Nebuchadnezzar was saying, this person looks like somebody not from this world, because Nebuchadnezzar had idea of many gods. So he was saying this person, the form of this person, he looks like somebody from another, from among the realm of the gods. So it has been translated as this Son of God by the King James translators. It has been embraced by people like us with great zeal, because it suits our narrative. But to be perfectly honest, that is not what Nebuchadnezzar said, because he didn't understand the idea of the Son of God. He was just referring to the glory of the glorious being that he saw, and he referred to him as a son of the gods. So anyway, this kind of covers pretty much where I wanted to go this evening, and this is just kind of like an outline that I wanted to deal with. And next week we'll go more in depth. I want to take a little time to look at certain prophecies in particular, like chapter 8 and chapter 7, because those are vital to understanding when we come to the book of Revelation. I'm not going to go back to chapter 2 because that is so very well understood, maybe certain little aspects of it, but chapter 7 and chapter 8 we will continue with next week. So we're going to stop here for this evening, but I'd just like to pause a little to find out if there are any questions or comments before we bring the meeting to an end.
Brother David, the 2,300, you are in agreement that it started in 457 BC?
The 2300 days. I'm going to switch my screen a little bit so we can actually look at the thing we're talking about. Like I said, we're going to spend some time looking at this, but let me just comment on it since you asked a question, Sean. I will answer your question this way. I have not found a better explanation. Let me put it that way. Okay. Am I perfectly satisfied with that explanation? I have some questions. I accept the starting point and the ending point because I don't have anything better. But there are some questions about it that I would love to get answers to that I cannot find answers to. But at the same time, when I look at the alternative explanations, they make less sense. They don't make as much sense. So I'm holding to this explanation about the beginning in 457 and going on to 1844, because I don't see anything that is better. I've never seen anything better. Nobody has ever shown me anything better. I've tried to look for a different explanation and I can't find any. So that is the best that I can see.
Well, David, I agree with you, because when you check back from the point of Christ, if you check it back from Christ backwards, it takes you right back to that point. If you use Christ as a reference point, it takes you right back to there and also forward. So I think I don't think there's any better explanation for that.
Right. I'm going to show you one of the issues that some people have, and I believe it is a legitimate issue. Okay. I'm going to explain. If you look at verse 14, and he said unto me, unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. If you look at this in any other translation of the Bible, you get the proper translation, which is, he said unto me, for 2,300 evenings and mornings. It does not say days, it says evenings and mornings. And you can look at any translation, including the literal translation. Young's literal translation says till evening, morning, 2,300. It does not say days, it says evening and morning. And that's the proper translation, because even in the King James Version, where it says 2,300 days, if you go a little further down, in verse 26, it says, and the vision of the evening and the morning which was told is true. So even in the King James Version, they show you that it should actually be evening and morning, right? So here is the thing. Here's the argument. 2,300 days, or should it be evening and morning? Evening and morning suggests the principle that one day represents a year is always based upon God gives you a day and you translate it to a year. He never speaks of it in terms of evening and morning. Never speaks of it in terms of evening and morning. So this is what creates a little problem. And this is why a lot of people attack the Adventist understanding. They say it's not talking about traditional days, it's talking about evening and morning. And evening and morning days are always 24-hour days. Never used in a prophetic sense. So that's the argument they have. And if I could find a different explanation, a better explanation, I might agree with them, but I cannot find a better explanation. So I have to say that just in this case, God said evening and morning when he meant days, which is not perfectly satisfactory, but I can't find a better explanation.
In Genesis, God talks about the evening and the morning makes a day in Genesis 1.
Yes, agreed. And that is why they have translated it as day. But the point they make out is that anytime God speaks about evening and morning, it's always 24-hour days, literal days. It's never used for symbolic days or day for a year. That's the point,
If you were to measure, if you were to count the time period, then using literal days, where would it take us? And how would that fit with the 70 weeks and all the rest of it, the explanation that the angel came to give?
Yes, so when you tie it in with chapter 9, where it talks about the 70 weeks, and it works out to be 490 years, and you take it off from the 2,300 days, it fits. But then again, the people who will, that is why I say I accept the explanation, but I'm saying that there are some elements of it that are difficult to explain, and this is one of them, okay? So it doesn't mean that everything fits perfectly like a glove. It means that it fits, but there are some little areas that could do with further clarification. Let me put it that way. So I do accept it. That is what I believe, but I'm saying here is a challenging issue that is not perfectly clear. That's my way of, that's what I have to say about it. All right. Now, since we are on this little section, I wanted to show you how Adventists read it and show you that the way Adventists read it is very disappointing. Very disappointing. Look at what is happening here. And we're going to spend some time looking at this, so maybe I shouldn't even have touched it here, but let me touch it since I mentioned it. It talks about the little horn, the exceeding great horn, the horn on the head of the goat. It says he magnified himself even to the prince of the host. And by him the daily was taken away, not daily sacrifice, but let's say it means daily sacrifice. The daily was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. Whose sanctuary? The sanctuary of the prince of the host. Who is the prince of the host? It seems very clear it's talking about Jesus. Who else would you refer to as the prince of the host? As a matter of fact, in the book of Daniel, in connection with the question somebody asked me, in the book of Daniel, the great prince is Michael. Michael is the prince of the host. But it says this little horn magnified himself to the prince of the host. And he took away the daily sacrifice. It seems he attacked the sanctuary. He attacked the service of the sanctuary, and the place of the sanctuary was cast down. Now, Adventists say this is referring to the casting down of paganism. This is what the early Adventists said. They said the daily sacrifice that was taken away refers to paganism.
How could that be?
All right, that's what I asked myself, but I'm going to tell you what you can find in Uriah Smith's book and what you will find most of the historic Adventists defending. They say the little horn magnified himself up to Christ. They agree with that. But they say the daily represented paganism, and the daily was taken away by the little horn because they say the little horn is a papacy. So they say the papacy took away paganism and threw down the sanctuary of paganism and attacked paganism. And in addition to this, it also cast down the truth to the ground, and it practiced and it prospered. That is how they interpret this passage. Which to me, it is very clear that they got it wrong, because this whole passage is talking about an attack against Christ and the truth of Christ. The little horn attacked Christ, the daily sacrifice, the ministry of Christ, the sanctuary ministry, and he was given an army against this ministry of Christ, and it cast down the truth to the ground, and it practiced and prospered. Then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto that certain saint which spake, how long shall be the vision concerning the daily sacrifice and the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden underfoot? This is where Adventism completely lost their bearings. They were to be completely, this interpretation is to be criticized, because they were so mixed up. They twisted the scripture to make it say what they wanted it to say. Because how long was the daily sacrifice to be trodden underfoot and the sanctuary to be trodden underfoot? The answer is in verse 14. Unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. They took verse 14 and they plucked it out of the blue, out of the context, and they say verse 14 is speaking about the cleansing of the sanctuary in heaven. Yes. And the verses that went before have no connection with verse 14. Even the question that is asked, they take it completely out of context. Because the question that goes before is, how long shall be the vision about the daily sacrifice, which they say is paganism, and the transgression of desolation, to give the sanctuary and the host to be trodden underfoot? The answer has nothing to do with how they interpret those verses. You go and look at the book.
Who's the host? What is the host?
They refer to it as the armies that were instrumental in overthrowing paganism. They talk about the Catholic Church overthrowing the three Arian kingdoms, the Heruli, the Vandals, and the Ostrogoths. They were able to overthrow paganism to make way for the development of the papacy. So they say that verse 14 has to do with the cleansing of the sanctuary of Jesus in heaven. And they say what needs to be cleansed? The sanctuary needs to be cleansed. Why does it need to be cleansed? Because the sins of God's people have polluted the sanctuary, which has nothing to do with the context of what is being said here. So I don't know if you understand what I'm saying. But this is the verse that Adventists used to say that the sanctuary needs to be cleansed because it has been polluted by the sins of the saints, and Jesus is going to do a judgment to take away these, to remove these sins from the sanctuary. It needs to be cleansed. But let me even look at this passage in a.
But that's
more,
really because it's clearly talking about the same thing coming down, and why it needs to be cleansed or restored is because of what was taking place with the verses above. I mean, it's in context. So how could they just take it out of context like that?
What they did was they looked at this word cleansed. They looked at this word cleansed, and they were looking for something because they had just gone through the great disappointment, and Jesus had not come. And they were looking for a way to explain the disappointment. Why is it that they thought Jesus was coming and he didn't come? And then they found this statement with the word cleansed, and they were studying the book of Daniel, and the word cleansed gave them the idea when they tied it in with other things that were happening. It gave them the idea that maybe Jesus had gone to cleanse the sanctuary in heaven, because the word cleanse made them think of the Levitical system and the Day of Atonement ritual in the book of Leviticus, which talks about the cleansing of the sanctuary, sins being taken from the sanctuary. So they tied it to this word cleansed. And that's why I want you to understand that most translations give you the meaning of this word as a matter of fact, let me look at the Strong's and see what it gives as a meaning for this word cleansed. According to Strong's, it can mean cleanse, it can mean justify, it can mean be made righteous. And it doesn't give you all the meanings, but those are three of the meanings that it gives you. And I'm going to show you how it is translated in some other translations, like the NASB. Here's what it says in the NASB, which is a translation I kind of pretty much trust that they try to stick to the literal translation. He said to me, for 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the holy place will be properly restored. The word restored makes far more sense when you look at what is being said. It says, let's start from verse 12 again. And on account of transgression, the host will be given over to the horn along with the regular sacrifice. It will fling the truth to the ground and perform its will and prosper. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to that particular one who was speaking, how long will the vision about the regular sacrifice apply, while the transgression causes horror, so as to allow both the holy place and the host to be trampled? And he said to me, for 2,300 evenings and mornings, and the holy place will be properly restored. So it's very clear if you look at it without any kind of bias, that it is saying the little horn damages the sanctuary, makes an attack against Christ, and it is allowed to continue for a certain time. And then at the end of 2,300 evenings and mornings, evening or days, then it will be restored. So something was to happen at the end of the 2,300 days. And I can accept that. I can accept that in 1844, God began to restore the truth that had been trampled underfoot by the papacy. I can believe that. When I look at the things that were given to the early Adventists, when I look at how God is developing our understanding, I see that God started a movement to restore the vital truths to the earth. That makes sense to me. But the explanation that is given traditionally in Adventism, it leaves a lot to be desired. Okay, so we are going to look at this more closely over the next few weeks. So I don't want to, I know there are questions, and I want to try to lay it out very simply when we actually come to it, so that everybody can understand what I'm trying to say. But I hope you kind of get an idea. Whoever asked the question, I hope that the answer here kind of gives us enough to hang on to for the time being.
Brother David, I think this controversy of this verse makes it difficult when you're dealing with, I want to say, those evangelicals who really come after Adventists over this very verse. And as a result, you know, Andrews, they they don't even teach the investigative judgment. They haven't done that for years in their theology department. They don't even touch it. So I think it's interesting that they hold to a doctrine they can't defend. I'm not saying I don't agree with I do, but I'm just saying the fact that it's such a controversy and you can't defend it with these people. And I think that was one of Ford's issues. And those people who left with Ford, you know, these are ministers who all left and for whatever reason went, you know, to Sunday keeping and Sunday places, all because of this right here that they could not defend from the way it's been presented, you know.
I agree.
So I think that's something that, and I've seen, I saw a video by a non-Seventh-day Adventist, but a Sabbath keeper, who did a video mocking, and it wasn't mocking in jest. It was a very serious video against Adventists, but the end result was this verse here in the way it was caricatured with caricatures, you know what I mean? And this was the issue. And in the comments, I read the comments and I was really amazed at what people were saying who were non-Adventists and who were not even evangelical. So I said, so when I sent the video out to people, I said, can you defend this doctrine? And no, this was to Adventists that I know. Just can you defend it? You know, because what he's saying is it's not, you know, it doesn't seem good. It makes you look bad. But can you defend it? And everybody who responded was all complaining about what they said in the comments. No one answered my question of defending this. I don't care what they said in the comments, but can you defend it? You know, and I do think this is an issue that we have to look at, because I found that this is a serious, and I never quite understood it when it became an issue with Ford, because there was so many, maybe because I wasn't clear in my own mind and there were so many issues with Ford, and I didn't really hear his side so clearly because I was listening to the church's side telling me what Ford believed, and then people who were gravitating to it who were really off, you know, like people that say that follow you, but follow your doctrine and say, oh, they don't have to keep the law so they can do whatever. And then people get this idea, oh, well, David Clayton's teaching that you don't have to keep the law, you can do whatever. Those were the kind of people that were following Ford and that I run into. So I couldn't go by even what they said, you know what I mean? So the whole situation got unclear and muddied, and I wasn't ever really clear. So I kind of stuck with what I knew, but never really being able to prove it. I just stuck with what I knew.
Well, I don't understand the investigative judgment as Adventists understand it, not anymore. But I don't reject the pre-Advent judgment. The Bible is too clear that there is a pre-Advent judgment. So we have to go with what the Bible says, regardless of whether anybody doesn't agree with Adventism or not, because it's not about Adventism. It's
Right.
about the Bible. And so, but definitely there are some aspects of the way Adventists approach some of these things which result in legalism, results in a distortion of the image of God. And so as we go into it, we want to go strictly by what the Bible says. And I would like everybody to really make sure we understand, so that I don't ramble on and just keep imagining that I'm explaining when I'm not explaining. Now this afternoon, I just wanted to get through that first part, but I promise we are going to go in depth into this particular prophecy. And it's complicated and it's difficult sometimes because we don't see the pictures. And if we're not familiar with the territory, sometimes it's really difficult. But I promise we're going to try to just make it as simple as possible. And hopefully we can all go along together.
Brother David,
Yes, Brother Cliff, go ahead.
do you think, you know, like I've watched old detective movies, and you know, sometimes we see where shredded evidence is sometimes pieced back together to get a glimpse of not the entire picture, because it's all shredded, but it's pieced back together to present what was shredded so that you could move on to come to a conclusion or to find other evidence that would bring conviction to whatever was shredded. I mentioned that because wasn't there a point in history where the truth came to a flicker, where the whole explanation and documents and many things were all destroyed or mostly destroyed, and people would grab documents and kind of memorize it and run into basements and run into caves and hide so that they could preserve the truth somehow. Do you think that shredding of the truth by the Roman Empire caused us today to have a pieced back shredding of the entire picture that we are now forced to work with in a canonized version of the Bible?
I agree with what you're saying in principle. I believe that, of course, what you say is really a very significant thing that we need to take consideration of. God always deals with his people on the level where they are, based on the circumstances. That for example, when God put people under the law, God didn't want to command people to be stoned. He didn't want to command lepers to be cut off from the nation, but he dealt with people in a certain context. And you see him doing certain things based on where they were. In the time of the apostles, there came a great light. But what we see and what the Bible prophesies is that there would be a great apostasy. And that in this time of great apostasy, a great darkness would come in. So I can agree with you that what happened at that time really caused the truth to become so disjointed, so disseminated, that it's very difficult to put it back together. And you talk about the Bible we have. Well, that's where I'm going to maybe differ a little bit or not be as strong as you are, because I believe God has given us what we need in total. Some people say that there are some books that should be in the Bible that are not in the Bible. I'm not going to buy that, because I don't believe that God leaves it up to me and my research abilities to learn the truth. What do I have to do? Go and look in the book of Enoch, go find the book of Barnabas, find the Gospel of Mary. I mean, what about the people who don't have these? So I'm kind of like, I think this way because I believe in the sovereignty of God, and I believe he gives us what we need. So I believe what he has given us is enough for us to it's enough for us to come back to that complete understanding of the truth. We have been given it. But we have passed through a period of great darkness. The world has passed through a period of great darkness, and the light is breaking at the pace that we can stand, that we can manage. I asked God. I've been a Christian 45 years. I asked God why it took me 30 years to understand the gospel properly. And God said to me, I took you as fast as you could go. It's kind of humbling, but that's what I get from him. I took you as fast as you could go. Based on the circumstances of my life, the circumstances of my upbringing, the information I had available, my attitude to life. It took me a long time, and God was going as fast as I could manage. Some of the things that I see today, God gave them to me 40 years ago. I would have rejected him outright. I would have rejected him. I wasn't ready and I wasn't capable to understand. So I think the world and the people of God are going at the pace that that we are able to receive it. And so I think the information is there. Now that I see us going to the Bible and these things beginning to come out, now that I see us understanding and seeing things that were always there, people say to me that it's like they never read Paul before. It's like they never saw the book of Romans before. What is happening is not that the word is changing, it's that we are becoming capable of seeing with honest eyes, with open eyes. We are becoming capable of seeing what is written there instead of what we have been taught. And it's a process and it takes time, and God knows, which is why he has ordained that things should work out in the fullness of time. That's how I would look at it too.
I agree. I totally agree. Thank you, Brother David.
All right, brother. Brother Peter, I don't know if you want to say something. I see your mic coming on, and Are you going to say something? Or is your mic taking control from you?
Verse 26 for me and explain it for
Verse 26 of Daniel 8.
9.
Daniel 9, verse 26.
Yeah, who is the prince?
Daniel 9 and verse 20. So I see the verse, but I'm not sure. Do you want me to comment on it?
Is the king. Who is the prince referring to?
Who is this prince that is referred to?
Yes.
Okay. It says, and after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off. That is Jesus. But not for himself, it is for us. And the people of the prince that shall come, this prince here that shall come is clearly Titus, the Roman general. He was a prince that came. His people would destroy the city and the sanctuary. So I think it's clear that in this case, this prince here is referring to the Roman general Titus. Now, I don't know if your emphasis is on the word prince, because the word prince is used also to refer to Michael the great prince, Michael, one of your princes. So the word prince is often used, especially in the Old Testament, to refer to a ruler. So the king of Rome or the general Titus would have been referred to as a prince. So I think what we have to do is look at the context to decide if it's speaking about Christ or somebody else.
ISP has commander, and the LEB all has leader. Those are the translations.
All right. Okay, so what I'll do, I'm just going to read some questions that were in the chat box, and then we probably end for this evening. So Brother Raymond said, should we conclude that the rock destroying the image is the kingdom Jesus has established within his people? I'll tell you why I don't necessarily agree with this. I agree that the kingdom Jesus has established is a part of that whole scenario of restoration. But remember, chapter 2 of Daniel is speaking about the restoration of the physical kingdom. Chapter 7 is talking about the restoration of the government, and then chapter 12 is talking about the restoration of the people. So the physical kingdom has to do with the physical place. So I think that we, the people, are not going to restore the place. We're not going to restore Israel. We're not going to restore the new earth. That's a work of Christ. So I think the kingdom, the stone that destroys the kingdoms of this world and becomes a great mountain, yes, we are involved, but I think that stone primarily represents Christ, because he it is who will destroy the kingdoms of this world. I don't think we have a part in that. I mean, our work will serve to overthrow the principles of Satan, which is at work in these kingdoms, but we won't have any part in actually destroying those kingdoms. So I want to be true to the pattern that we see in the prophecies, you know. I want to welcome Brother Thomas Batcher. Sister Dario asked me to welcome you. She tells me that you're listening. So welcome, brother, and I'm glad to have you with us this evening. I hope you can hear what I'm saying. We really appreciate you joining us, and we hope you have been blessed. All right, so God bless you. All right, Brother Juan Carlos, thank you for the comments. We're going to close off here for this evening. So, Brother Ian, can you pray to dismiss us, please?